And so what we can observe is that someone was looking for Brad Hansel, yeah, but they were looking for him by his specific military title in military jargon, which is weird to say the least. But it kind of indicates for us, hey, you know what? It's a little bit less likely that this person was just jumping on Google than it is the fact that this is probably someone who at least knows that title because most people, they don't.
Okay, so looking at this particular chart, we're looking at Tucson, specifically Sierra Vista, which is the military town where Fort Huachuca is located, May 1st till September 9th, 2025. So between May 1st and June 16th, there's nothing. And
That's
then
right.
suddenly on June 16th, there is. And that search was for specifically Brad Hansel, OUS, and I can't see the rest of it.
Yeah, it's OUS DI plus S, which, as you can imagine, is not how most people look that person up, right?
No,
So
what does
that's
that
his,
even mean?
right. It's the Office for the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. So it's his like official title. And he's someone who in the Pentagon, he has a few different roles. So it would make sense for the layperson, a civilian, to Google him using his just his name, right? But once you start to look at him by his official title, it makes it a lot less likely that we're talking about a random person. So it's like we're not talking about Brad Hansel, the guy who, works down the street at Safeway. We're talking about Brad Hansel, who is the OUSDI. And most people are not calling him that. By the way, you can start to see a little bit of a data cluster, which is kind of what I was talking about by getting a little bit suspicious when you see people Googling someone in a really short frame of time, because it shows that that interest was there. And the reason for that, well, that's what we have to infer. But if you're looking at the fact that he's being Googled in this really narrow time frame, you can start to think, okay, so someone needed to know who this guy was, and that's fine. But there were no indications of that being a standard Google search. Nothing was happening. I did check, throughout the news cycle, and nothing in particular was happening with Brad Hansel during that little media cycle. But still, it wasn't enough for me to rule in or rule out. So I had to look at him under different titles. I think the next slide is going to be a little bit more illuminating.
So why would somebody on Fort Huachuca or in the area, why would military personnel want to see the pictures of Brad Hansel?
Absolutely, that's a great question, and I have something that we'll talk about later when it comes to Cabot Phillips. So please remind me when we get a little bit further down the
Sure.
road. But in the meantime, so when it comes to Brad Hansel, if someone's using that specific title, then generally speaking, that is someone who is not familiar with their face. Something that we know is that military members, especially the young ones, have a little bit of a problem with maintaining OPSEC. And unfortunately, it happens. It's not the end of the world, but generally speaking, it is probably the number one issue when it comes to
And
young
you know this
soldiers.
how? Like, well, what makes you qualified to speak on what enlistees know about OPSEC?
Well, that was a huge part of what I used to do. I come from a background in medicine, but a lot of what I was specifically tasked with was educating young soldiers and making sure that they were aware of how important it was to maintain OPSEC. That really is something that is supposed to be kept top of mind. I never taught down in Arizona, but it was a constant battle to keep them from Googling things. Now, they were generally speaking, Googling, stuff on their phones just on the web browser. But as far as the image search, that is when they're going to go and pick somebody up from the airport. That's usually what that is. If you have never met your boss or your boss's boss, rather, if you've never actually met that person, you do receive a small brief as a part of your plan to go and pick up a senior enlisted, or an officer. That's what the young guys are tasked with. They have to go and grab them on post and escort them around, but they don't know what they look like and they don't know who they're looking for. So at that point, they grab their phone, and usually on the way to the airport, they are Googling that person just to see if they can have an idea of who it is that they're supposed to go and get.
Okay, so just speaking extra contemporaneously here, in your experience on these bases, just having flashbacks to my Mitch Snow interview, he said that the vehicles that are used to transport these people around Normally, for like lower level enlistees, they will drive, smaller four-door sedan type vehicles, a Ford Taurus, something like that. But for like high-ranking government officials, these government service vehicles are like Denali Yukons. They're blacked out. Is that true?
Well, oftentimes it really depends. It really depends on if they're staying on post or if they're going off post. Sometimes folks are tasked with using their personal vehicle. That's usually more kind of what you think of when it's a lower level person. But those government service vehicles, those are reserved for the bigwigs. That being said, the person who picks them up, the military is not paying for Uber, right? They don't have a chauffeur service. What they do is they grab maybe a specialist or someone who is available that day and then task them with going and picking up someone from either the airfield, the local airport, wherever the case, wherever that person's flying into, and then taking them. So they're basically Uber for the day.
So if it were a VIP, which they would have to be if they're on a SAM flight, which Bradley Hansel was on, flight 702 SAM, Special Air Mission Flight 702 into Fort Huachuca and out of Fort Huachuca on September 9th, that person would likely be picked up. The Undersecretary of the Department of War would be picked up, certainly in one of those higher class government service vehicles, correct?
That's right. But the person who's driving that vehicle, that's the person who would be, doing the Googling because regardless, they just don't know who it is that they're looking for. I mean, as you can imagine, folks, they wear, their name is displayed, but as you get higher and higher into the levels of government, and when you're talking about the Department of Defense or Pentagon officials, oftentimes they're not actually wearing their name on their uniform. So Brad Hansel would have been perfectly appropriate to show up in a suit, right? So it's not like you could know who exactly he was, what his title was, what his rank was, unless you knew his face. And that's usually why they want to take a quick peek to know.
So if Brad Hansel was coming in and he needed an escort, they would get a quick brief. Hey, Brad Hansel is coming in. Bradley Hansel's coming in from the Pentagon. You're going to go get him. Familiarize yourself.
Absolutely. You're lucky if you get a paragraph, that's not a guarantee. But generally speaking, you would get a piece of information from your CO. It's going to say, hey, you need to pick up this person at this time. And they will give you the title of that person in that message. And my inference here, this is not, saying that I know this for 100% sure, but it's the same way that they were Googling him that they would have provided that title. So my guess is it's a copy paste. That's hypothesizing, but it's what makes sense to me.
Okay, there were some other searches as well. Who's this guy?
So that is Shahab Chaudhry. So there were a number of Pentagon officials that I also found in the Google searches. So Shahab Chaudhry, he is the acquisition guy for special weapons of warfare, and he is in the Pentagon. He actually, I believe that he is the contract writer, and he is so the way he's being Googled is the DASP plus W. So if you can imagine, that's not the way that most people are going to Google who Shahab Chaudhry is. If I want to know who Shahab Chaudhry is, I'm just going to look him up, right? But this D dash, right. That is the exact way that that name was put into the box on Google on that day. And so you can imagine that when you're taking a look at some of these folks' titles, we're not looking at the way that civilians are looking someone up. And so what I observed was that these important officials, well, it would be perfectly appropriate for someone to go and grab them and to need to take a look and see who they were.
So
He's
I
just one of
see
them,
that
yeah.
there are other names here at the top who were all Googled for an image search roughly the same time. Who are these
That's
other people?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is why I find that this like data clusters is so edifying, right? So those folks are all part of either acquisition, like Shahab Chaudhry, or they are part of the Defense Intelligence Agency. See, when I was looking at Bradley Hansel, I noticed that when he was being Googled during that July portion in the early planning stages by his title at the Pentagon, which is this OUSDI, right? But a little bit later, into I believe it was the month of August, they began to start to look him up under this. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. The DDI. The DDI is a dual title that he holds. and that is the director of the Department of Intelligence, I believe. Um, anyway, what that did for me was that opened up an entire new list of colleagues that I thought it would be worthwhile to track down if any of those other folks were being Googled too. I figured in the lead up to this big meeting, if they were looking at him, they would probably be looking at his colleagues. I went through all of the Pentagon officials that work with him that would make sense. And again, I came up with James, Shahab, these acquisition guys, the contract writers, the check signers. But once I realized that he was also over this Defense Intelligence Agency, well, now at that point, it started to get really interesting. And that's where, yes, I came across James Rainman Adams. So that was my first clue that there was something going on. As you can see on that image, there were people who were being Googled right up until the day of the meeting, right? So as I started to look through, Lieutenant General James Rainman Adams, for example, he is the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. That is a very specialized agency that I think might be relevant to the story, and we can talk about it more if you want to. But it was
I
him
do
who was
want to
being,
expand on that.
yeah, sure. So the Defense Intelligence Agency is it's a very niche agency. Its specific task is to take foreign weapon systems and foreign intelligence methods, and then to not only ideally protect our service members from those weapons, but to copy them. It is the agency that would, for example, if there were, I don't know, let's say pagers that exploded in
Yeah,
Lebanon.
exploding pagers like were used against Hezbollah.
Yeah. And the purpose of the Defense Intelligence Agency is to go and take that kind of weaponry and weapon systems and to try to replicate it for the US government if it's appropriate to.
Okay. And so who is this guy?
So that is so that is Rocco. So he is one of our acquisition specialists. So he is the person where if you wanted to, I don't know, create an advanced weapon system, then that's the guy who signs the check for it. So he's a very important part of the Pentagon that he is in that acquisition specialty, but he is ultimately someone who is under Brad Hansel. Yeah. So he's one
And
of our
these
spokespersons.
people were
Yeah.
being specifically searched. And you can see the historical data here. I mean, there is nothing at the beginning of August at all. Nobody was interested in who this guy was, specifically by his title, using these acronyms.
That's right. Exactly. So I start out all the way back as far as January, and then I narrow the search from there. Anytime that there is a positive result, then I always include it. So if you
So
were
you
not
went all the way
saying,
back to January of 2025, and there was nothing. There was no historical data.
that's right. That's right. None of
Nothing.
these
For
people,
the
nope,
entire year, there was nothing.
not by their title. I did look at, ASWA or any other version of their title, but there was nothing. No.
So interest over time, going all the way back to January, nobody was making the searches for these people at all, other than you said Brad Hansel was searched a handful of times throughout the year. Is that right? Or was he searched not at all?
I have included any times that he was searched. So if it's not right there in the image, there was, those times in July. And then I believe that there was one outlier that I want to say was a slightly bit earlier. There was one
In
initial
June.
outlier. There we go. Yeah, that's right. So other than that, no, this is not a common search. It's not a way that people go about looking up these officials. No, he's not someone who is being looked at. Yep, that's
So
his
all
early
of these
background.
people work on replicating, duplicating, securing, funding, financing weapons of war.
That's right. Advanced weaponry, specifically ones that we are trying to replicate from a foreign government. I don't know for sure if we're talking about the Lebanon pager, but it certainly feels relevant given the circumstances. At that point, once I saw that Rainman Adams was being Google searched, I thought to myself, he feels to me like that might make sense for him being an attendee if Fort Huachuca was a demo. And that was my kind of hypothesis that I've been working on for about the past 6 months, was that it was possible that this was a demonstration. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but that if Fort Huachuca was a meeting that was there to demonstrate our capabilities as far as, these advanced weapon systems, it would make a lot of sense for Rain Man Adams to be there. And if he's there, then his deputies are coming with him. And I found both of them. And if they're there, then I would expect for the R&D lead, which is Scott Kirkpatrick, to be there as well. And there he was. So I was able to build out what I would say is a reasonable acquisition pipeline for how military procurement goes.
Amazing work.
Thank you.
Let's move into the second zip file that you sent me, and we're just going to quickly show these slides. Who is this?
So that is DDIA Christine Boline, and she is one of Rain Man Adams' deputies.
And we saw her name in the zip file number 1.
That's right.
I saw that in the searches. Who is this pencil neck here?
Well, now that's something that I thought that we should touch on for a second. When I put together my initial list of our persons of interest as people who may potentially have been at this meeting, one of my gals pointed out to me that doesn't that look a little bit like Erica's ex-boyfriend
It
with a
does.
beard, which apparently he was supposed to have, Cabot Phillips. I mean, I wish I had a side by side, but it was a little bit shocking. So who that person is he is the director of science and technology he's the director of science and technology for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, I'm not saying that Cabot Phillips was there or wasn't there, but it was interesting to me to come across someone who, my viewers just caught on and said, hang on a second, that looks a lot like Cabot Phillips. Is it possible that the person that was seen there is that guy instead? So things to think about. But
And
it
who
rung
is
true for
he and
me.
what does he do?
So that is Mr. Scott Kirkpatrick, and he is the Director of Science and Technology for the Defense Intelligence Agency. That is the Chief of Staff, John Kirchhoffer, for the commander of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So not only were they searching for the images of the director of the DIA, but they were also searching for his chief of staff, his deputies, his, colleagues that specifically would be working with him and accompanying him to a meeting like what we believe happened at Fort Huachuca. There's the man himself. That's Rain Man Adams. When I initially ran across all of these Google searches around him, I thought, well, okay, maybe he's enough of a known person that people wanted to know who he was. I'm not totally sure. But once I saw that they were Googling his chief of staff and how he looked specifically, as well as his deputies and his director of science and technology, all within the same small time frame and just their images. They were not looking these people's bios up, and they were referring to them by their specific military title. And at that point, I was like, this feels like it's something. It's not nothing.
I don't know what the odds are of that. I mean, if you were to put it into some sort of an AI supercomputer calculator, it would probably tell you that the odds are actually incalculable, that all of these people would show up at one time or be searched at one time by their specific titles.
Yeah. With their deputies with them. Right. So there is James Adams. So that's Rain Man Adams. He is the director of the DIA. And I thought that it was really interesting, the fact that he was being searched by these official titles, as you can see right there. He was being searched by these very official titles. And that was in kind of the lead up to this meeting. But if you look right at the end on the far right, you can see that that is right when he hypothetically may have been arriving to post. And you can see that he was being searched by phrases like Lieutenant General Adams, in the abbreviated shorthand. Now, I'm not saying that it's for sure, but to me it would make sense if someone got a quick message saying that they needed to go and pick him up. That would be a likely way that they would, look him up. Let's see. Then those are his deputies. And as you can see, right at the same time frame, everyone was being Google image searched. They had not been previously in the year. I can see that one hit for Director James James Adams, which is that yellow search right there. But again, it's the cluster that is the part that lets me know that there was some reason to look for this group of individuals right in this short time frame. and not just look them up, not look up their bios, take a look at how they looked.
It's just unbelievable.
I know.
Here's this next slide that
Yeah,
shows
sure.
this cluster again.
That's right. So that's a little bit more, of like up close data, just so you can see the dates a little bit more specifically. There were many of them that were being searched, including the chief of staff for the Defense Intelligence Agency, who was being searched right through the actual date of, right through September 9th. So now this is total hypothesis and pure speculation, but it would make sense if someone showed up late. That's what I would expect to see, that last minute Google search where they wanted to make sure that they went and grabbed him.
Okay, sorry. Hold on a second here. I'm just trying to get to this next zip file that you sent me,
Sure,
which
yeah, we can go on.
is number 3. Okay, who is?
Ah, yes. So that is Admiral Brad Cooper, and he is the commander of CENTCOM. So CENTCOM is our region in the Middle East, specifically. That, I mean, it encompasses some of, North Africa and a little bit around Europe, but primarily the responsibility of Admiral Brad Cooper is our Middle East conflict, and he is stationed at MacDill Air Force Base. That's another image of him. The reason that I included a few is because
MacDill
to
Air
me,
Force Base, by the way, is in Tampa.
yes, sir, you're right. There he is again. That's his official photo. I don't know if any of those photos looked familiar to you. A few of them looked a little bit familiar to me. I've been wondering for a very long time if it were possible that there was someone who were on that SAM flight, that SAM 702, who was a little bit more recognizable, important than Brad Hansel. No offense, Brad. But if there was someone who maybe there was an actual requirement to make sure that his face wasn't seen by other folks, that is his chief of staff, and that is Patrick Frank. He is the deputy commander of CENTCOM. He was Google searched as well. Richard A. Harrison, and he is another major general at CENTCOM. And there are the Google searches. So when I have been thinking about who the potential passengers were, who may or may not have attended this meeting with Bradley Hansel, but were important enough that they had to clear shop, according to Michna. If you remember, they actually requested that he, step away. They moved him out. I believe they detained him, if I'm not mistaken, for an amount of time
Yeah,
because
he was questioned by one Captain Neff.
that's right. Small world. I don't know. We can't rule anything out at this point, right? But he was brought away from the actual location of that meeting, right? Because they didn't want him to see someone, as far as I understood, who was either arriving or leaving the actual meeting itself. And I've been thinking to myself for a long time who that person might be who was visually recognizable. Because if you have to close shop and you actually need everybody out of there because someone's so important, I don't think that it was Brad Hansel. So I started to take a look and I had been looking for him for a long time in a lot of different places, but I had been looking for him as an admiral. Interestingly enough, he was an admiral, but he was personally selected by Donald Trump to be the commander of CENTCOM. And to me, he feels like the sort of person that you might need to actually close shop for. He's visually recognizable, which I think is a really big key as far as the SAM 700 call sign, and he certainly qualifies as enough of a VIP where he would need operational security, including a flight being scheduled out of the White House military office. But when I took a look at the other folks in the preceding days and weeks, his chief of staff, his deputy, and the folks that he works with directly, they were also included. And I thought to myself, well, maybe that is who we're talking about here. Yeah.
So if Cooper were traveling,
Mhm.
would this clown and this pencil neck have been traveling with him?
Correct. Yes. Those would be folks that he would generally have with him whenever he attended anything official, anything unofficial, or anything in between. Yeah. Those are the guys. So he's a little bit of an interesting character. I I don't have an opinion on him one way or another. He is our commander of CENTCOM, and so he is the person who's in charge of our Mideast conflict right now. But I'm not here to pass any judgment or make an allegation. It's just an interesting data point, in my opinion, that the commander of CENTCOM and his immediate staff were being Google image searched in the days prior to this meeting.
Okay, I find that to be extremely
It's a lot,
coincidental
right?
as well.
I know. Oh boy. Well, get ready, buckle up. Oh boy, yes. So that is Dr. Angela D. Lewis. This is where it gets a little bit scary, Stu, I'm going to tell you. So here's the thing. Dr. Angela D. Lewis, she's someone that I came across because as I had started to develop this working theory of what I might be seeing here, what I figured was, okay, so the Defense Intelligence Agency, a few folks from the Pentagon, a few folks from CENTCOM, it might make sense if they were at a high level meeting. I can see that, especially if it were some sort of demonstration or planning event. But what I figured was, if this had anything to do with accurate energetic systems, then what I needed to do was take a look at the individuals that are associated with Crane. Because Crane is the destination of the extra small shaped charged munition.
Okay, we're
If you
talking about
recall,
the anti-personnel
that's right.
micro-explosive DoD $440,000 order that we found for accurate energetic systems.
That's right. That was an order that was, I believe, opened on, I think, May 25th. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was May 25th, and then it was
That's right.
closed on
Yep.
August 25th or 6th, right in there. So that was something that ended up being sent to NSWC Crane. That's a very specific military base that's up in Indiana. And as you know, I'm sure, every military base serves a little bit of a different purpose as far as what they specialize in. Crane, in particular, they deal with microelectronics. And so that's the sort of thing that, if you were sent a component, that was the sort of thing that maybe you needed to end up in a Rode microphone. You receive the component, and Crane certainly would be more than capable of putting that together to go into a Rode microphone or whatever the, you know, instrument might be. So when I, thought about the fact that, okay, Crane, it makes a lot of relevant to our investigation. And once I felt a certain degree of confidence that it would make sense to check if any of these folks were also Google image searched, especially given that as civilians, they would need that direct escort as soon as they set foot on post. Whether they arrive by plane or by car, they would still need to be escorted anytime that they were on post. And that includes Mr. Brian Harpole, who I was surprised to see. Now, this is a sort of thing. Oh yes, we'll get to him. Absolutely. He's relevant to this story. So for Brian, it is absolutely not it's not him who's doing the Googling, right? So we have no idea why the name Brian Harpole Security was being Google searched at that time in the lead up to that event. But if you would indulge me and hop over to, let's see here, 5.2, that is a slide that I think is a little bit further down
Okay,
because
hang
I
on a
think,
second here.
sure,
5.2, you said?
yeah. Mhm. Because I think that that kind of shows kind of the full picture of what I observed in the Google Trends. Right. Thank you so much. So when I started to look at Brian Harpole with the hypothesis that it was possible that he may have attended a meeting like this for unknown reasons, possibly. When I started to look, I was Googling Brian Harpole security, checking him in the trends. I noticed that I had a frequent autocorrect. Are you able to hear me still?
I am, but you're kind of rubber banding a little bit.
Are you
You're,
able to hear me? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, you're fine. It's just, it looks like your internet might be lagging a little bit. Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. My first time being live.
Yeah, no,
I
it's
can
fine.
now.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, so go ahead and continue. You were looking
I
for
can now.
Brian Harpole Security, and you were looking for some sort of a connection. I see some other names here, so go ahead. Try to make sense of this for us.
That's right. Sure, absolutely. So once I had established the fact that it would appear as though someone was Googling Brian Harple security. A second layer that I like to go through is to make sure that any frequent autocorrect options that I also take a look at. So, every time that I would put in Brian Harple, it would autocorrect to Harpoon, which is silly. But I figured, if my computer's autocorrecting to Harpoon, I better check if anyone else's does as well. So at that point, I was surprised to see the fact that, not only was Brian Harpole security, but this, frequent autocorrect option was being looked at as well. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not sure that that really tells us anything. Who knows, right? Absolutely, who knows what that could be about. But I figured, just because Brian Harpole's name appears here doesn't mean anything necessarily, especially because we're a little bit outside of the actual event itself. So I'm not sure why exactly they would be Google image searching him. So at that point, I took a look at who the other persons were that are involved in integrity security. And that's how I found John Ragland, which is the gentleman that we saw a little bit ago. So that is Brian Harpole's business partner in the image. His name is John Ragland. And he is someone who, yeah, there he is. Okay. So that's John Ragland. And he is Brian Harpole's business partner, and he is the, I believe, co-owner. Please correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe that he is the co-owner of Integrity Security Solutions. I was surprised to see his name pop up spelled that way, but the name John Ragland is not exclusive to the co-owner of Integrity Security, so who knows, right? But at that point, I felt like, I'm seeing what appears to be evidence of some sort of potential connection, so I better go ahead and check the folks that were in the car, the rest of them. We know that Brian Harpole was located in the rear passenger captain seat in the SUV that transported Charlie from UVU to Timpanogos Regional Hospital. In the rear driver's seat was Frank Cutler. I did not see any positive Google trend searches for him. I checked Frank Turek, I checked Dan Flood, but there's another man that no one has really talked about that much, but his name is Justin Davis, and he is the man who was driving the vehicle. And I was surprised to see that on, let's see here, September 6th, his image was being specifically searched at the area around Fort Huachuca. So, he is not the
So
only man.
why would a driver be participating in, a test run? Well, obviously, because he's going to be the driver of the vehicle that it has been planned Charlie Kirk is going to go into. There's no ambulance there.
That's right.
Which is...
We can only speculate.
Of course, and I'm speculating here. Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
But
total speculation. There is a whole lot of evidence to support the speculation. I mean, this is very reasonable speculation. And we do know that there was no ambulance there. I do find that curious because Utah Valley University, Turning Point USA, Brian Harpole's security companies, insurance riders probably say that when you're going to have 3,000 people gathered in a place and you have a high-profile principal that you're protecting for Brian Harpole, or when you are a publicly funded university like Utah Valley, or when you are a organization like Turning Point USA with this large gathering working with your insurance companies, of course they would say inside of their rider, think that there would be an ambulance there or that it would be a requirement. There wasn't one. I don't know that for sure because I haven't read the contracts, but I do know that I have been at plenty of places where thousands of people are gathered and you can't look in any direction one way or another without seeing emergency vehicles staged there and there and there. You see it at the state fairs, you see it at concerts, you see it at outdoor gatherings. Of course, the probability of medical issues goes up when you gather thousands of people together.
Well, and if you recall, they declined the EMTs that rushed up to try to, assist them right as they're getting into the SUV. There were, I think, two EMTs that came up to at least offer them supplies, but they indicated that they were fine, jumped in the car, and, well, from there, unfortunately. But I couldn't agree more. It made no sense at the time, and it still doesn't.
Now we know who these people are, obviously, Candace Owens and Mitch Snow. Was there a reason why you included this picture?
Well, I did want to include that just because it occurred to me when I was looking at my timeline of events that this was really the moment that things changed, in my estimation, for how the situation was being managed by Turning Point USA, by the various figures that we have questions about still to this day. As soon as Mitch Snow got onto Candace and started having conversations with her about this little base that quote unquote no one had ever heard of, everything has absolutely, skyrocketed as far as their response, as far as the amount of, stress that they are clearly under and the reactions to people who are asking very reasonable questions. So my feeling has been that Fort Huachuca, for that reason alone, felt like it mattered to me. And that's why I have been working so hard to try to figure out if we can figure out some of those officials that maybe Mitch Snow felt that he had seen. I mean, I didn't, my feeling has been, I feel like it's a little too nihilistic to just say, well, this was the military and this was Israel, and so therefore, but these people have names. These people have identities. These people have oftentimes jobs and they're in our communities. And so to me, it feels like the right thing to do to see if we can maybe identify some of these individuals that we want to ask questions to, because that's the first step to accountability and that's where we have to start. I don't want to just say Israel did it. I want to know who, and I don't want any of them to get away with it.
Likewise. You said that you asked permission to break something here with us this evening. The floor is
That's
yours
right.
on that.
Sure. Well, so as we've talked about, I feel as though Google Trends is a really, really good way for us to get some information in a sense, but do we have any sort of indication that that device made its way from Crane to Fort Huachuca? I thought, well, the best way to check on that is to see if any individual associated with Crane appears in Fort Huachuca. And so Dr. Angela D. Lewis is the division tech director at Crane, who oversees their advanced weaponry program as well as drone coordination. Dr. Jonathan M. Dilger is the director of research at Crane. He also has he has oversight of their microelectronics department. And Captain Rex Buyabas is the commander of Crane.
This guy.
That's right.
And
Now
what's
it's
his
spelled
name? This is the commander of
Cap
Crane. What's his name?
Captain Rex Buyobas. I
How do you
hope I'm
spell
pronouncing
that?
it right. Booyobas. A little bit of an unusual name, and
Who has heard of this guy before? Have you ever heard of this guy before?
no, no. And so imagine my surprise when
Imagine your
those.
surprise when you saw this. Somebody who had the exact spelling, because
Mhm,
again, these are in quotes.
that's right.
And look at these people being searched from Sierra Vista on Fort Huachuca between
Image
August
searched.
1st and September 10th.
That's right. Image searched, including Captain Rex Bunyobas, all the way up until I believe the most recent one for him was September 7th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, I can't hover over the image, because we're doing this from
Yeah,
an
yeah,
iPad.
yeah.
But Captain Rex Bunyobas is not only the commander of Crane, but he also is in charge of their logistics and operations, which means that if you wanted to transfer a device, for example, just a hypothetical, but if you wanted to take an explosive device and you wanted to move that device from point A to point B, like from Crane to Fort Huachuca, or if you wanted to move that device from point A to point B to point C, well, that would be the person who would coordinate those logistics, Captain Rex. And he does appear. The thing that I hope that, that I have been thinking about that I think, maybe is worth us keeping in the back of our mind, that contract specifically, it never designated a quantity, right? We know that it's something that was not some frequent order. This isn't some standing order that they sent to Crane. This is the type of item that was a very specialty item that they had never received a contract for before. And I do not believe that they've received anything even very similar since. But the specialty item, 440,000, it never says that that item is specifically one. And my hypothesis, and this is just me personally, but it, in my opinion, would make a lot more sense if maybe they order two
or
because you
10.
would need one or 10. Sure, who knows, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
But you might need one to demonstrate because the
You might
system,
need to test them. You might
yeah,
need to demonstrate them. You might need to have a show and tell,
that's right.
with all of the people. If you were planning a military mission and it was a high risk mission,
Mm,
you want to make sure that you've got all your bases covered. So you want to make
that's right.
sure that consistently over and over and over again, you rehearse, you walk through, you war game, you game plan, you make sure that things are going to go off without a hitch.
Mm,
And the more you go over these things, obviously, the less likely that there is a malfunction or a slip or somebody doesn't know what to do or where the device is, etc. Well, the same thing would be true if you were planning to publicly assassinate Charlie Kirk and you wanted a weaponized exploding lavalier microphone with a shape charge placed underneath his white freedom shirt to send a projectile into his chest to make it look like or to replicate the trauma that one would expect from a 30-06 high-powered rifle where you have a patsy on a rooftop pretending to shoot one.
and other, and just to buoy that theory, it is relevant, I would say, that at Crane, that is where they are in charge of using their microelectronics division specifically to arrange for remote triggers, remote detonation, simultaneous detonations. For example, if someone wanted to have a lapel mic, go off at the same time that maybe a gunshot was fired overhead, that the way that you could coordinate that being done at the exact same moment would be through simultaneous detonation, and that is very specifically something that they work on at Crane and that they test at the Electronic Proving Ground at Fort Huachuca.
In the fifth zip file that you sent me, you just have a kind of like a blank screen here. What is this?
So that is mostly just a good way for us to visualize what we're seeing when we see overlapping data. I just thought that it was better if it was zoomed in a little bit because what I wanted to make sure that everyone saw was the fact that sometimes these days are not consecutive days, they're actually the same day. So that's all things that we can visualize through using Google Trends, just as an example for how specific you can get with this information.
Okay, so what you're showing here is that these searches were performed on exactly the same day when you're looking at the red one and the yellow one.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Let's see
And then
here.
you have overlapping days here between the green and the purple.
Generally speaking, if, and just to hypothesize, but if folks are brought into a meeting, for example, an important demonstration, they don't always have everyone come in at the same time. Oftentimes, depending on your role and depending on what your tasks are, you'll either come in right away, you'll come in a few days early, or if you're, one of the big bosses, you might show up the same day, get the demonstration, or attend the meeting and then fly back out.
Yeah, so I mean, if you were a staffer, you might arrive middle, late August. You might arrive, I mean, you're staying on base. You
Well,
are military command staff. You support military command staff.
absolutely. So, if you are someone who maybe is part of the scientific branch, for example, one of the doctors that runs one of the programs at Crane, you may have several trips to the base in preparation because coordinating something like that, including a demonstration, takes a great deal of work. Often it's weeks of planning, but that's what chiefs of staff are for. That way, the big bosses only have to come in once,
If there
ideally.
were like, 5, 10 of these devices that were manufactured by Accurate Energetic Systems, they fulfill this order, it goes to Crane, and they're holding these 5 or 10 devices. Would it make sense for some of the people in the scientific divisions to go there multiple times to watch test runs after test
100,
run? We're going to blow one up today. You want to come down and watch this? Yep. They would go down there and watch it. They would go back, etc. So you may see several trips, throughout this
absolutely.
period of time.
Yes, you couldn't be more correct. That really is the way that modern engineering, testing, acquisition, this is the modern military procurement pipeline at work, and you just laid it out so well. So, if you are a part of the scientific leadership group, then you would absolutely go down to maybe the electronic proving ground or whatever the coordinated base was that you were going to do this demonstration. And then at some point, once you feel as though the testing phase has been completed well enough that you guys are satisfied with the results, that's the point when you bring in everyone, including the guys with the checkbooks at acquisition, to make the final demonstration and, kind of have the final plans worked through. So that, to me, it looks like a very standard military procurement, pipeline. It really does look very standard. The unfortunate thing is what the actual item may have been that was being procured.
And I see that Brian
So,
Harpole is on this one as
you
well.
saw that, huh? Yeah. So, once I had put together the fact that I thought, you know what, I think I know what I'm seeing here. I think for me personally, just my opinion, what I see here looks like a standard acquisition pipeline leading up to a demonstration. And who are the people that we either heard may have been a part of this demonstration or that ultimately may be relevant. And I am not making any allegation toward any person. I just want to make sure that I say that very clearly. But I found some information
You don't want to
actually
get
this
sued,
evening.
and these people are very litigious.
There is that. There is that for sure, of course. But that's the thing. We have to go max.
They're
Yeah.
liars, and they have lied about like everything. So,
Right. Yeah.
look, I don't care. I've been served in this lawsuit between Brian Harpole and Candace Owens and Mitch Snow, demanding that I hold on to all of my pictures and videos. I've told them where they can go. They can pound sand. Harmeet Dillon and her law firm are not going to demand that I do anything with my communications and with my pictures and my videos. So anything that I have, whatever. But anyways,
Well,
yeah, I understand your concerns about being sued,
sure. Well,
but I just want you to speak as freely as possible.
sure. Well, so I ran across information, and to me, it just introduces a few questions, and I think that it's worth bringing up because bringing things to the public is really the best way to hopefully take the information and maybe be able to rule it out. I'm really hopeful still to this day that we're able to do that. But as I was going through the Google Trends, and as I was looking for individuals that I thought may possibly be some names, some faces that we are familiar with, because we were seeing a pretty clear pattern. Once I got to Justin Davis, I said, okay, so right about this time, a person with the same name as whoever drove Charlie Kirk to Timpanogos was being Googled. And I felt at that time that I needed to take a look at some of the other individuals who are affiliated with Charlie, with Turning Point. And what I wanted to let you know is that I ran across concerning Google Trends searches in the immediate days up to about a week or so prior to this Fort Huachuca meeting. And they were Googling Andrew Colvett and his boss, Johnny Moore. And that's not information that I was emotionally prepared for. So, yeah. So, that image right there, I made sure to include Charlie Kirk as a baseline control. See, if we think back to the summer last year, that was a time before many of us had been introduced to figures like Andrew Colvett at the very least, but some of us to his boss, Johnny Moore. Now, that is the person who he's worked with for a number of years, especially prior to his introduction into Turning Point. But that is a man who owns and operates the Kairos Company, which is a PR firm, a crisis PR firm. Johnny Moore is the man who runs the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Unfortunately, that has been a very problematic situation. He is a mega Zionist pastor. He sits, I believe, on the ADL. He is the chairman of the International Coalition of Christians and Jews. He's quite the character. I'm going to say that as politely as I can. And I made sure to include Charlie Kirk as a control because, again, those men, while they were known names, that neither of them was nearly as known as Charlie. So I wanted to, for me, decrease the likelihood that I was just picking up, I don't know, maybe an exciting episode of the Charlie Kirk show, or that he had, recently attended an event and people were Googling folks that they had met there. Who knows ultimately? But I will say that in the exact time frame were individuals who may be associated with the procurement pipeline for a device like that. We're heading to Fort Huachuca. it would appear that someone was looking for Johnny and Andrew too. And the thing that I keep getting stuck on, I have been trying very hard to come up with a reason, to come up with a good reason why someone would be looking for Andrew Kovat in the immediate day prior to this hypothetical Fort Huachuca meeting, especially since he was being Google searched in his capacity at Kairos, which is his partner company with Johnny Moore, not as a Turning Point employee, not as a Charlie Kirk Show employee. He's being searched in his capacity as a colleague of Johnny Moore. I do think that it is relevant that I believe during this time frame, while they were both at Kairos, I do believe that they may have worked for Miriam Adelson, Miriam and Sheldon Adelson, right in there as part of the Friends of Zion, which is a specific, that was a specific company that Miriam Adelson was involved with at the time. But I am at a loss, and that's why I thought that it was important to bring it forward, because I truly don't know what it means that they were being looked at while all of these other Pentagon officials were being looked at. I'm at a loss with it, and that's why I wanted to bring it up.
I just want to rapid fire here before we go.
Mhm.
And I just want to go through all of these pictures and all of these people,
Yeah.
and just to very concisely put together who they are and what their functions are, and then very quickly look at the Google image search data.
Sure.
So take us through these people.
Sure. So that is Shahab Chaudhry, and he is in charge of acquisitions at the Pentagon for special weapons and programs. That is Bradley Hansel. He is not only the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, but he's also the DDI, which is over the Department of Intelligence. That is James Ruoko, and he is the man who signs the checks that Shahab Chaudhry has actually made out for him. So they work in tandem. They're both a part of defense acquisition for special weapons and programs. They are who exactly you would charge with, I don't know, paying for a very high level advanced drone system or a high level advanced small device, an extra small shape charge anti-personnel munition. That's who pays for it.
And those three people who operate in the capacity that you just described were all searched from Sierra Vista, where Fort Huachuca is located. And they were searched starting in the middle of June for Brad Hansel under a specific title, and then again in a cluster under a variety of different ways. And again, these are web searches here.
That's right. And if you go on, you will see that he was in addition to that, he was being searched as the DDI. That piece of information allowed us to find that he was being searched in his capacity as the DDI. That's kind of his side gig, maybe you'd say. That's his additional role. Now, after finding out that he was being searched at Fort Huachuca or the surrounding area as the DDI, what that did is that allowed for me to take a look at who his colleagues are in that specific department. And that was where we came across all of the individuals that are associated with the DIA. And that is the Defense Intelligence Agency, the folks who take things like pagers from Lebanon and try to copy that technology for American use.
And those people all appeared in these Google searches in an overlapping way. I mean, I'm talking about like a week before Charlie Kirk was murdered.
That's right. And in the immediate days prior to what may have been a meeting at Fort Huachuca, including the chief of staff, the both deputies, and all of the gear tech bosses. That is exactly who is being image searched at Fort Huachuca. That's usually something that they do when they want to bring the specialty personnel on post. junior enlisted need to go and pick that person up and escort them. And so what they often do is they will take a peek at folks like Christine Boline. She is one of the deputies for the Defense Intelligence Agency, as well as her colleague, who I think bears a little bit of a striking resemblance to Cabot Phillips, but
He
that's just
does. He
me.
really does.
It was pointed out to me by